When we're thinking about what the Father wants to see, one of the useful tools we can use is the Father's heart tool. The Father has a big heart for the nations, for UK, for Ireland, and He's made that clear in the Bible. He said, "It's not my will that any should perish." He said He wants disciples made of all nations, and so many others that we could think of where God shows His heart to save. He doesn't take pleasure in the death of the wicked and all this kind of stuff. So He's got a massive heart, and we want to make sure that our heart is in keeping with His heart, and this is the Father's heart tool. So we start off with the Father's heart. It's a big heart. And when we think then about the Father's heart, for Ireland specifically, in my case, we're thinking, what does the Father want to see specifically for Ireland? In Ireland at the minute, in Northern Ireland, there's 1.8 million people. The Republic of Ireland, it's 4.6 million people. What does the Father want to see amongst those people in terms of disciples being made, churches planted to plant churches, and leaders multiplied as well? So we've been thinking through this and praying through this, using this tool. We start off with that population, a population that by 2030 is going to rise to 7 million or thereabouts on the island of Ireland. And we're thinking, what's the Father want to see with those, amongst those people? What's going to be needed to see His heart fulfilled for those people? So, having prayed and thought, then we think, well, what's going to be the aim for us? What's going to be the initial goal for us to reach? In our case, we felt like God was saying the initial goal for us would be 1 million people in Ireland. So 1 out of every 7 of those people that would be there in 2030. So we can stick that in as our goal, population goal. Make sure I have enough zeros. 1 million people in Ireland, 1 in 7 by 2030. How many churches are going to be needed for those people? If all of those people are going to be meeting in churches of 12 to 15 people, simple churches that can multiply and reproduce, how many are we going to need? And that's somewhere in the region of 70,000 by 2030. That's a huge goal. We think a God-sized vision, and a vision, the way we've put that together, that can be done for any number of areas. It can be done for whole nations. It can be done for a housing estate. It can be done for a village. Depending on what God's call is to certain areas or certain people groups as well. So now that we've thought that through and we think, God, we want to see 1 million people come to know You and be baptized in Ireland. We want to see 70,000 new churches with these people in them. What are we going to do then? Well, that seems like a massive goal. So we can break that down into segments to make sure that we can think through it a bit more clearly and figure out how we're going to get there. In our case, we've been thinking about that in terms of the counties of Ireland. 6 counties in Northern Ireland, 26 in the Republic of Ireland. So that's 32 in total. And we want to make sure that there's disciples being made, baptized, and there are churches being planted in every one of those counties. And so over the course of the years, we've broken that down into how many counties do we want to make sure we are impacting over the years. By the end of this year, we've aimed for just 2 counties, 6 churches in 2 counties, 30 baptisms. That's the goal for the end of 2015. Then we've thought, 5 years' time, how do we need to move forward to make sure we're going to reach this goal of 1 million by 2030 and 70,000 churches? So in 5 years' time, by the end of 2020, we want to see 1,200 baptisms, 200 churches in 12 counties. So we're thinking through another segment. Once we're hitting that, we're thinking a bit further ahead. We've broke that down into thinking of, by 2030 then, we want to hit the 1 million people baptized following Jesus, 70,000 new churches in 32 counties. So not just huddled together in one part of Ireland, but every single county in Ireland where there are reproducing disciples and churches moving forward with Him. If we hit 1 million in 2030, we're praying we will, we'll think of the next 1 million then for the next target. So we've broken it. You can break that down into segments then. Now, if we're going to hit 1 million people baptized in Ireland, if we're going to hit 70,000 new churches in Ireland, that's not going to happen by me or someone else running around and trying to start 70,000 new churches. It's not going to happen. Even if there's a team of 100 people, they're not going to be able to start 70,000 new churches. They're not going to be able to baptize 1 million people by themselves. And so this is when we begin to think of the generations, particularly what we call 4G. This is based on 2 Timothy 2, verse 2, where Paul says to Timothy, what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. It wasn't just that Paul was thinking, I'm going to go around and make loads of disciples and that's the end of it. But he was saying, I'll pass it on to Timothy, who'll pass it on to faithful men, who'll pass it on to others also. And so we want to see something like a tree spreading out. So perhaps it begins with one individual, but what they're doing is then spreading it out to others, and it's passing on and passing on. And so it's multiplying, not just adding. This is the only way whereby it would be possible to see 1 million people discipled and 70,000 new churches. It's the only way. And so this is what we're pressing for. 4G multiplication. In order to see this, though, of course, there's another aspect. We might be able to come up with a nice vision that reflects God's heart and the way in which we're going to go about doing that. But to really get there and to see this kind of massive fruit, we're going to need two things. One of them, based on John 15, it's abiding. And Jesus said that those who would abide in him and him in them would bear much fruit. And that's the only way to do that. So we have another diagram, a man who has God's heart, he's abiding in Christ. We're going to need to abide in him. Specifically, that might refer to the idea if we're going to be listening to him and obeying him. It's not just that we'll run off and try and fulfill this ourselves. We're listening to Jesus and we're wanting to obey him. Not only will we need to abide in him, that's John 15, to bear much fruit, but we're also going to need to have desperate prayer. Desperate prayer. So this is our little diagram for that, desperate prayer. I'll write that on there. So in order to see this kind of fruit, we can't just assume that if we have a little bit of prayer here and there, that's going to reach it. We're going to need desperate prayer. We're going to need to start houses of prayer, people gathering together for prayer. We're going to need to encourage private prayer and follow the example of Jesus, who time and time we read him getting up early in the morning, staying up late at night, staying up all night, going off into desolate places, and it was always connected with what he was going to do next and what he'd done previously. This is the only way whereby we could reach this goal of 1 million disciples in Ireland in 70,000 new churches. Again, as I've said before, this can be done for any number of other areas. It can be done for estates, it can be done for villages, it can be done for towns, cities, people groups. What is God's heart for the people group? What's God's heart for that city? It's a big heart. And what are you going to aim for then? Are you going to aim for something small? Or aim for something big that reflects the big heart of God? Break it down into segments then. Break it down into segments. How are you going to do that? What areas are you going to target first? How's it going to happen? And then think through 4G. It can't just all be reliant on one individual or two or three, or even quite a large team of good guys, good evangelists, good apostles, good prophets. It's going to have to spread from person to person to person to the fourth generation and beyond if anything's going to happen that way. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2. We're going to need to abide in Christ in John 15 to bear much fruit, abiding in him and him in us, obeying him, listening to him, doing what he says. Then we're going to need desperate prayer accompanying that. We need to pray and obey to see this happen. If you'd like to know more about how to do this, how to realize God's heart for the people group he's calling you to, for the area he's calling you to, you can find out more information from the New Forms website. There you'll see information about how you can have facilitate a vision day, how you can have more training and how to go about in pioneer mission and see God's heart fulfilled for your people.